Turn off the engine and step out. Now.
I'm active loading, picking up my brother. I'm not violating anything.
A black man in a $90,000 SUV? Yeah, I don't buy that. Hand me your ID.
I'm Commander Marcus Sterling, U.S. Navy. If you keep this up, you're making a serious mistake.
Officer Derek Vance had been patrolling the loop at Metro International Airport for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and cost the taxpayers $6.5 million. He was 29 years old, aggressive, and possessed that dangerous combination of arrogance and ignorance that inevitably leads to disaster. It was a bright, chaotic Tuesday morning, the kind of day where the exhaust fumes mix with the humidity to create a thick gray haze over the terminal. Vance was watching the traffic flow, or rather he was hunting. He wasn't looking for terrorists or safety hazards. He was looking for people who didn't fit his picture of who belonged in the priority pickup lane. And when he saw the pristine black luxury SUV idling near the Terminal 3 exit, his bias kicked in before his brain did. Behind the wheel was Commander Marcus Sterling, a 22-year veteran of the United States Navy, a man who had coordinated logistics for carrier strike groups and managed multi-billion-dollar supply chains. But Vance didn't see a commander. He saw a black man in a $90,000 vehicle, and he decided right then and there that a crime was in progress. Before we get into the details of this egregious abuse of power, take a second to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We cover these stories because accountability matters, and if you believe in justice, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep the spotlight on the truth. The arrivals loop at Metro International is a high-stress environment by design. Cars jockey for position travelers, drag luggage across crosswalks, and the whistle of traffic enforcement officers cuts through the roar of jet engines. It was 10:15 a.m. The sun was glaring off the asphalt. Commander Sterling had pulled his vehicle, a 2024 GMC Yukon Denali, to the curb in the designated active loading zone. He wasn't parked. The engine was running. His foot was on the brake, and his eyes were scanning the sliding glass doors for his younger brother, a diplomatic attaché returning from a 3-year post in Brussels. Sterling was a man of precision. At 45 years old, he carried himself with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who has commanded thousands of sailors. He was dressed in civilian attire, a crisp polo shirt and slacks, but the military bearing was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. His haircut was regulation, his posture erect, his situational awareness sharp. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what citizens are allowed to do. But Officer Derek Vance didn't see military bearing. Vance had a history, a file that was thick with citizen contacts that skirted the line of harassment. His supervisors called him proactive. The community called him a menace. He had a specific trigger high-end vehicles driven by men of color. In his distorted view of reality, a black man in a luxury SUV at the airport was either an unlicensed taxi driver hustling for fares or a drug courier moving product. It never occurred to him that the man might be a doctor, a lawyer, or a senior military officer. Vance sat in his cruiser 3 cars back watching Sterling. He saw Sterling check his watch. He saw him tap the steering wheel. To Vance, these weren't signs of a brother waiting for a delayed flight. They were furtive movements. Vance muttered to himself, convinced he had spotted a predator in his territory. He threw the cruiser into drive, didn't bother with the lights, and pulled up aggressively behind the Yukon, blocking it in. He stepped out, adjusting his belt, already deciding how this encounter was going to end. Commander Sterling watched the officer approach in his side mirror. He didn't panic. He had no reason to. He had spent 2 decades in high-pressure zones where panic could get people killed. He assumed the officer was just moving traffic along. He rolled down his window as Vance marched up to the driver's side, his hand resting ominously near his holstered weapon, a tactical intimidation move that was completely unnecessary for a traffic check. Sterling turned his head, ready to explain that his passenger was walking out the door any second. "Good morning, officer." Sterling said, his voice deep and steady. "I'm just waiting on a passenger. He's at baggage claim carousel 4. He expected a nod, maybe a move it along if he's not here in 2 minutes. Instead, he was met with hostility that seemed personal from the first syllable. "Turn off the engine and give me your license and registration," Vance barked, leaning down to peer into the vehicle, his eyes darting around the immaculate leather interior. "You've been idling here for 10 minutes. This is a loading zone, not a parking lot for soliciting fares." Sterling blinked, processing the accusation. "Officer, I've been here for less than 3 minutes, and I'm not soliciting fares. This is my personal vehicle. I'm picking up my brother." Vance sneered, a look of utter disbelief crossing his face. "Your personal vehicle. Right. A $90,000 truck. You expect me to believe you just bought this to pick up family?" The insinuation hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Vance wasn't asking a question. He was making an accusation about Sterling's financial legitimacy based solely on his race. Sterling felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the frustration of having his achievements erased by someone else's prejudice, but he kept his cool. Discipline was his profession. "Officer, I am not required to explain my finances to you, but yes, this is my vehicle. I am not a taxi service. I am not a rideshare. I am a private citizen picking up a family member." Vance stepped back, hand still hovering near his belt. "I told you to turn off the engine. You're loitering in a secure area. Step out of the car." This was the turning point. A lawful order must be based on a lawful premise. Sterling knew the regulations. He wasn't obstructing traffic. He wasn't unattended. "Officer, I am in compliance with airport regulations for active loading. If I turn off the car, I am parking, which is a violation. I am remaining active. If you need to see identification, I will provide it, but I am not stepping out of the vehicle." Vance's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He wasn't used to people knowing the rules better than he did, and he certainly wasn't used to a black man speaking to him with such authoritative calm. "I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Step out of the vehicle now, or I will remove you. We have a problem with illegal solicitors here, and you fit the profile." Sterling realized then that this wasn't about traffic flow. This was about dominance. He knew he had to document this. "I am going to reach for my wallet." Sterling narrated his movements, slowly keeping his hands visible. "I am going to show you my identification, which proves who I am." Vance tensed but didn't stop him. Sterling reached into his back pocket and withdrew his wallet. He didn't pull out a standard state driver's license first. He pulled out his U.S. Navy Common Access Card, his military ID, and his distinct laminated commission card which identified him as a commander in the United States Navy. He held them out the window. "I am Commander Marcus Sterling, United States Navy. I am an active duty officer. I am asking you to look at these credentials and lower your tone." Vance snatched the cards from Sterling's hand. He looked at the CAC card, the chip, the hologram, the rank insignia. It was a federal document property of the U.S. government. To a trained eye, it commanded respect. To Officer Derek Vance, who had never served a day in a uniform other than his own, it looked like a prop. He let out a short, derisive laugh. "Commander, you," Vance scoffed, shaking his head. "Buddy, I can buy one of these on the internet for $50. You think I haven't seen fake military IDs before? This just makes it worse. Impersonating an officer, that's a felony." Sterling remained stone-faced, though his internal alarm bells were ringing. "Officer, that is a valid Department of Defense identification. If you doubt it, you are required to verify it with your dispatch or the Shore Patrol liaison. Do not confiscate that ID." Vance ignored him. He pocketed the ID cards. "I'm not calling anyone for a fake ID. Get out of the car, now." The situation had escalated past the point of return. Vance was now operating on confirmation bias so strong it blinded him to reality. He saw a fraud, so the ID had to be fake. He saw a criminal, so the protestations of innocence were just resisting arrest. Sterling knew that if he physically resisted, he could be shot. He made the calculation that every black father teaches his sons to make survive the encounter, fight the battle in court. "I am unbuckling my seatbelt," Sterling said, loudly, ensuring the officer's body camera, which he prayed was recording, picked up the audio. "I am complying with your order under duress. I am a senior naval officer, and you are making a grave mistake." Vance yanked the door open before Sterling could even finish unbuckling. He grabbed the commander by the arm and hauled him out of the SUV. The scene immediately drew attention. Travelers on the sidewalk stopped. Phones came out. A woman in a business suit gasped. "What is he doing? That man wasn't doing anything." Vance didn't care. He spun Sterling around and shoved him against the side of the polished black Yukon. "Hands behind your back! Stop resisting!" Vance shouted, performing for the audience, even though Sterling was standing perfectly still. His muscles relaxed, offering zero resistance. "I am not resisting," Sterling said, clearly, his voice projecting to the bystanders. "I am Commander Marcus Sterling. This officer is arresting me without cause." The click of the handcuffs was audible over the traffic noise. Vance ratcheted them tight, punishingly tight. "You're under arrest for loitering, soliciting without a permit, and possession of forged government documents." Vance recited, feeling a surge of triumph. He thought he had just made the bust of the month. He thought he had caught a high-level con artist. He had no idea he was currently manhandling a man with high-level security clearance who was responsible for the movement of nuclear assets. Vance patted him down, roughly pulling his car keys and phone. "Tow it!" Vance yelled to a traffic aide nearby. "Full impound. Search it for inventory." Sterling's heart sank, not for himself, but for the vehicle. Inside his briefcase in the back seat were logistics manifests, unclassified but sensitive documents regarding fleet supply chains. "Officer," Sterling said, his voice low and urgent. "There are sensitive government documents in that vehicle. You do not have the clearance to view them. If that car is impounded, you are creating a national security incident." Vance laughed again, pushing Sterling toward the patrol car. "Yeah, sure. Nuclear codes, right? Save it for the judge, buddy. Get in." He shoved a decorated commander of the U.S. Navy into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of a squad car like a common drunk. As they pulled away, Sterling looked out the window and saw his brother, luggage in hand, stepping out of the terminal, looking around in confusion for the ride that would never show up. The drive to the airport substation was short, but for Sterling, it was an exercise in mental cataloging. He memorized the time, the route, the officer's badge number, 894, and every procedural error Vance had committed. Vance, meanwhile, was radioing ahead, his voice brimming with unearned confidence. "Bringing in 1 male charges of forgery and resisting. Impounded his vehicle. Guys trying to play the 'do you know who I am' card." The dispatcher acknowledged, unaware of the storm that was coming. When they arrived at the precinct, Vance hauled Sterling out and marched him through the back door, parading his trophy past the holding cells to the processing desk. Sitting behind the high desk was Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a former Marine who was counting down the days to retirement. He had seen it all, and he had a low tolerance for nonsense. He looked up as Vance dragged Sterling in. Miller's eyes narrowed. He didn't look at the handcuffs. He looked at the man wearing them. He saw the posture. He saw the haircut. He saw the eyes. Miller stood up slowly. "What do you have, Vance?" Miller asked, his tone cautious. "Illegal solicitor at Terminal 3, Vance announced, proudly tossing Sterling's wallet and the fake IDs onto the counter. "Refused to move, driving a $90,000 truck he obviously can't afford, then tried to pass off this garbage." He pointed to the CAC card. "Claims he's a Navy commander, fake ID." Miller picked up the CAC card. He felt the weight of it. He looked at the chip. He looked at the expiration date. He looked at the photo, then at the man in cuffs. Miller's face drained of color. He had carried a card just like this for 4 years, though his was green for enlisted. He knew exactly what a real one looked and felt like. This was real. He looked at the commission card. Real. "Vance, Miller said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was scarier than a shout. "Take those cuffs off, right now." Vance blinked. "Sarge, he's a suspect. The ID is fake." "I said," Miller roared, slamming his hand on the desk, "take the damn cuffs off him. That is a common access card, you moron. This man is a commissioned officer." Vance froze. The confidence evaporated, replaced by a sudden sickening doubt. He fumbled for his keys. Sterling stood silently as the cuffs were removed. He rubbed his wrists where the metal had bitten into his skin. He looked at Sergeant Miller. "Thank you, Sergeant," Sterling said calmly. "I am Commander Sterling. My vehicle has been impounded. It contains government property. I need to contact the Judge Advocate General's office immediately." Miller came around the desk, ignoring Vance completely. "Commander, I apologize. I sincerely apologize. We will get your vehicle back immediately. Vance, give me your badge and your gun." Vance stepped back. "Sarge, I didn't know. He looked like..." "Like what?" Sterling interjected, turning to face Vance for the first time since the arrest. "Like a criminal, because I was driving a nice car, because I'm black." Vance had no answer. He stood there stripped of his authority, watching as Miller made the phone call that confirmed everything. The Department of Defense liaison confirmed Commander Sterling's status within 30 seconds. The airport police chief was on the phone 2 minutes later. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a processing center to a disaster management zone. Vance was escorted out of the room not as an officer, but as a liability. But the damage was already done. The bystanders at the airport hadn't stopped recording when the patrol car left. The videos were already uploading. By 2 p.m., the first video hit Twitter. By 4 p.m., it was trending globally. The visual was impossible to ignore: a polite, well-dressed black man being manhandled by a young, aggressive white cop, while calmly stating he was a Navy commander. The internet detectives went to work. They identified Vance. They identified Sterling. The narrative was devastating. American hero arrested for picking up brother. Racist cop ignores military ID. The local news stations picked up the story, filing FOIA requests for the Bodycam footage immediately. Because it was a high-profile incident involving a federal officer, the department released the footage within 24 hours to get ahead of the story. The Bodycam footage was the nail in the coffin. It showed everything the bystanders missed. It showed the initial approach. It captured the audio of Vance sneering, "How can you afford this?" It captured the laughter when Sterling showed his ID. It revealed the complete lack of provocation. There was no "he said, she said." It was 4K definition of racial profiling. The internal affairs investigation, usually a slow process, was expedited. They opened Vance's file and found what they should have seen years ago: dozens of stops of black and Latino men in luxury cars. Suspected drug activity, noted on reports where no drugs were ever found. Warning issued for infractions that didn't exist. Vance had been hunting minority drivers for sport, and his supervisors had looked the other way because his ticket numbers were high. But you can't look the other way when the victim is a commander in the United States Navy. The Navy wasn't just angry. They were involved. The Judge Advocate General's office communicated directly with the city attorney. The message was clear: this was a violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and a disgrace to the uniform. The city didn't even try to fight it. They knew a jury would look at Commander Sterling, a man who had served his country for 2 decades, and then look at Officer Vance, and they would award a verdict that would bankrupt the department. The settlement was reached in record time: $6.5 million. It was one of the largest payouts for a single incident of wrongful arrest in the city's history. But the money wasn't the headline. The headline was the systemic purge that followed. Derek Vance was fired 6 weeks after the incident. His arbitration hearing was short. The union didn't even fight hard to keep him. The video was indefensible. His certification was revoked, meaning he could never work in law enforcement again in the state. The sergeant who had signed off on Vance's previous evaluations was demoted. The policy for verifying federal IDs was rewritten nationwide. Commander Sterling donated a significant portion of the settlement to a legal defense fund for veterans of color who had been targeted by police. At the city council hearing where the new oversight policies were signed into law, Sterling spoke. He didn't wear his uniform. He wore a suit. He stood at the podium, the same calm, disciplined man who had stared down an armed officer at the airport. "I stand here today not because I am special," Sterling told the silent room. "I stand here because I had a rank that Officer Vance couldn't ignore once the handcuffs were off. But I ask you, what if I had been a teacher? What if I had been a carpenter? What if I had been just a brother, picking up a brother? Would I still be sitting in a cell? The dignity of a citizen should not depend on the rank on their ID card. It should be inherent. Officer Vance didn't see a commander. He didn't even see a man. He saw a stereotype. And until we root that out, no badge, no uniform, and no amount of money will make us safe." Sterling's words resonated far beyond the hearing. The incident became a case study in police academies across the country. The Sterling Standard teaching officers that bias is not just a moral failing. It is a professional liability that can destroy lives and departments. Derek Vance is now working in sales for a landscaping supply company. He refuses to speak to the media. Commander Sterling retired from the Navy 2 years later with full honors. He now runs a logistics consultancy and mentors young officers, but he still feels a tightening in his chest whenever he sees blue lights in his rearview mirror, because he knows that to some people, his service, his sacrifice, and his rank will never matter as much as the color of his skin. This story forces us to ask the hard questions. Why are we still hiring officers who view the public as enemy combatants? Why did it take a Navy commander to expose a pattern of behavior that had been going on for years? And most importantly, how many Derek Vances are still out there patrolling our streets right now? We need to hear your thoughts. Do you think officers who profile drivers based on their cars should face criminal charges, not just firing? And should there be a federal do not hire list for cops like Vance? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it. The more we talk about these injustices, the harder it becomes for them to hide in the dark. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
Drop the tool and get on the ground, now.
I'm on my own property fixing my fence. Put the gun down.
You don't get to tell me what to do. You match the suspect.
I'm a homeowner and a retired Army Master Sergeant. This ends badly if you keep going.
Drop it.
All right.
Slowly.
Hammers down, hands are empty.
Stay right there.
Deputy Kyle Vance had been wearing the badge of the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department for just over 5 years when he made a decision that would incinerate his career and cost the taxpayers of this county exactly $1.9 million. He was 29 years old, fit, ambitious, and possessed a dangerous combination of limited life experience and absolute certainty in his own instincts. He walked with a swagger that suggested he had seen it all, though most of his shifts involved traffic stops and noise complaints. But on a bright Tuesday morning in October, Vance's inability to distinguish between a criminal threat and a law-abiding citizen would turn a quiet suburban street into a national headline. He believed he was the thin blue line protecting civilization. Instead, he became the very chaos he was sworn to prevent. Before we get into the details of how this unfolded, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that respect is something earned, not given just because you wear a uniform, hit that subscribe button. We need to keep telling these stories. The setting for this disaster was the pristine, tree-lined neighborhood of Oak Creek. It's the kind of place where folks retire after 40 years of grinding at the mill or the office, where lawns are manicured with military precision and American flags hang from sturdy porches. It was 10:30 a.m. The sun was high and bright, casting long shadows through the turning autumn leaves. The air was crisp, the kind of weather that makes a man want to work with his hands. Marcus Thorne was doing exactly that. At 64 years old, Marcus was a man carved from granite and discipline. He was a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Army, a man who had given 22 years of his life to his country, serving tours in conflicts that most young deputies only knew from video games. He had the knees and the shoulder scars to prove it. Marcus had purchased his split-level home in Oak Creek 20 years ago, paid for with the sweat of his brow and the GI Bill. He was a pillar of this community, the kind of neighbor who loaned you tools and never asked for them back, the man who snow-blowed the widow's driveways in the winter without a word of complaint. On this particular Tuesday, Marcus was tending to his castle. A section of his white picket fence had started to lean after a heavy storm the week prior, and Marcus, a man who took immense pride in maintenance, wasn't about to hire a contractor for a job he could do himself. He was wearing his work clothes, a faded gray army t-shirt that hugged his broad chest, a pair of worn-in cargo pants stained with paint and oil, and heavy work boots. He moved with a deliberate, practiced rhythm. He wasn't rushing. He was removing the rotted wood, measuring twice, and preparing to set a new post. He had a crowbar in one hand and a claw hammer on his belt. He was on his own property, listening to classic rock on a small radio, minding his own business. To anyone with a lick of common sense, Marcus looked exactly like what he was, a homeowner fixing his fence on a beautiful fall day. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't acting suspicious. He was working. But common sense is a commodity that seems to be in short supply these days, especially when prejudice clouds the vision. To the wrong pair of eyes, Marcus's presence wasn't a picture of domestic tranquility. It was a threat. And unfortunately for Marcus, the wrong pair of eyes was watching him from across the street, peering through the blinds with a mixture of fear and ignorance. Bradley Cummings had only lived in Oak Creek for 3 months. At 34 years old, he was a mid-level marketing manager who had moved from the city seeking safety and quiet. Bradley was the type of man who viewed the world through a lens of constant suspicion, a man who checked his doorbell camera 20 times a day and posted on the neighborhood watch app about suspicious vehicles that were usually just delivery drivers. He didn't know Marcus. He hadn't bothered to introduce himself to the neighbors yet. He preferred to observe from the safety of his living room. From his window, Bradley didn't see a decorated veteran maintaining his property. He saw a black man in dirty clothes wielding a crowbar. He saw muscles and a grim expression. In Bradley's mind, which had been fed a steady diet of fear-mongering cable news and internet paranoia, the narrative wrote itself instantly. This wasn't a repair job. It was a break-in. He convinced himself that the homeowners, whoever Bradley thought they were, must be at work, and this brazen criminal was prying open the side gate to loot the place in broad daylight. Bradley watched for another 2 minutes, his heart rate climbing for no reason other than his own fabricated panic. He saw Marcus wrench a stubborn plank of wood free with the crowbar. Crack. The sound of the wood splitting made Bradley jump. That was it. He fumbled for his smartphone, his fingers trembling, and dialed 911. He didn't take a second to look at the mailbox, didn't notice the confident way the man moved around the yard. He just reacted. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked, her voice calm and professional. I need police immediately, Bradley whispered, though he was inside his own locked house. There's a man trying to break into a house across the street. He has a weapon, a giant metal bar. The dispatcher's tone shifted, becoming more urgent. Sir, are you safe? Can you describe the suspect? I'm inside. He hasn't seen me, Bradley said, peeking through the slats of his blinds. He's a black male, large build, wearing military-style pants. He's using a crowbar to smash through the fence and the side door. He's violent. He's tearing the place apart. Is he alone? Yes, but he looks dangerous. Please hurry. The owners probably aren't home, but he's going to get inside any second. We have officers en route, sir. Stay on the line. Bradley hung up, feeling a surge of self-righteous adrenaline. He believed he was being a hero. He believed he was protecting his new neighborhood from the element he had moved here to avoid. He didn't realize that he had just aimed a loaded weapon at an innocent man. The information he gave the dispatcher, smashing through violent weapon, transformed a routine welfare check into a high-priority felony call. The call went out over the radio frequencies, stripped of nuance, stripped of context. Burglary in progress. Suspect armed with a metal bar. Forcible entry. And of all the deputies patrolling the county that morning, the one who picked up the call was the one man who should have been nowhere near it. Deputy Kyle Vance heard the code for a burglary in progress, and he didn't check his computer for homeowner records. He didn't wait for backup. He hit his lights, slammed on the accelerator, and sped toward Oak Creek with a vision of glory in his head. Deputy Kyle Vance had a reputation, though it wasn't the one he thought he had. In the locker room, he talked a big game about being a sheepdog protecting the flock from the wolves, but his personnel file told a different, darker story. In 5 years, Vance had racked up 6 formal complaints. That's a number that should make any supervisor sweat. 4 of them involved excessive force. 2 involved racial profiling. There was the incident 2 years ago where he pulled over a Hispanic grandfather for a broken taillight and ended up detaining him for an hour on the side of the road, searching his truck for drugs that didn't exist because Vance thought he looked nervous. There was the time he tackled a college student at a park because he thought a frisbee dispute was a gang fight. In every instance, Vance had been cleared or given a slap on the wrist. Retraining was the official term. His supervisors, an old boys club that valued arrest statistics over community trust, viewed Vance as proactive. They said he had a nose for crime. They ignored the fact that his nose seemed to be permanently congested with bias. Vance was results-oriented, but his methods were sloppy. He treated every call like a combat drop. He lacked the ability to de-escalate. To Vance, compliance had to be immediate and absolute. Anything less was a challenge to his authority. He had failed the empathy portion of his psychological evaluation twice, but passed on the 3rd try. He viewed the citizens of Pinewood County not as the people he served, but as potential suspects he hadn't caught yet. As his cruiser tore down the asphalt weaving through the mid-morning traffic, Vance's mind was already made up. He wasn't going to investigate a situation. He was going to take down a bad guy. He visualized the suspect described on the radio. Black male crowbar breaking in. It fit perfectly into the narrow, prejudiced categories Vance kept in his head. He didn't consider that a burglar usually doesn't break into a house at 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in plain sight. He didn't consider that military pants might be worn by actual military personnel. He only saw the collar. He turned onto Sycamore Drive, the engine of his cruiser roaring. He didn't cut the siren to approach quietly. He wanted the intimidation factor. He wanted the suspect to know fear before Vance even stepped out of the car. This was the mindset of a man who plays soldier but has never understood the discipline of a true warrior. Marcus Thorne heard the siren wail, but he didn't look up immediately. He was focused on pulling a rusted nail out of a cedar post. In Marcus's world, sirens were for other people accidents on the highway medical emergencies 3 streets over. He had no reason to believe the cavalry was coming for him. He was just a man fixing a fence. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove, took a sip of iced tea from the thermos on his porch steps, and picked up his hammer. That was the moment Deputy Vance skidded to a halt in front of Marcus's driveway. The cruiser was parked aggressively, blocking the view. Light bar flashing blue and red against the peaceful autumn leaves. Vance didn't assess the scene. He didn't look for a getaway car. He didn't notice the pristine condition of the rest of the house. He kicked his door open and unholstered his service weapon before his boots even hit the pavement. The silence of the neighborhood was shattered not by the siren, but by the screaming voice of a 29-year-old man with a gun. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now! Get on the ground!" Marcus. Thorne froze. He turned slowly, his movements deliberate, conditioned by decades of handling firearms and high-stress situations. He saw the barrel of a Glock 17 pointed directly at his chest. He saw the young deputy face flushed veins bulging in his neck, crouching behind the open door of the patrol car. Marcus didn't drop to his knees. He didn't throw the hammer. He simply lowered his hands to his sides, keeping them open and visible. He stood tall, his spine stiffening with the dignity of a man who knows exactly who he is. "Officer." Marcus set his voice a deep rumbling baritone that carried easily across the lawn. "There is no need for that firearm. I am holding a hammer. I am repairing my fence. I said get on the ground. Now drop the weapon or I will shoot." Vance screamed, his voice cracking slightly. He was pumped full of adrenaline and fear, a dangerous cocktail. He wasn't seeing a homeowner. He was seeing the armed suspect from the dispatch call. Marcus looked at the boy because that's what he saw, a boy with a dangerous toy and no discipline. "Son, listen to me carefully. I am the homeowner. My name is Marcus Thorne. I live here. This is my property. I don't care who you are. Get on the ground." Vance began to advance, leaving the cover of his car door. He moved with jerky, aggressive steps, closing the distance. "Do it now." Marcus remained standing. He knew the physics of the situation. If he made a sudden move to lie down, this nervous rookie might twitch and put a round in him. Staying standing calm and visible was actually safer, provided the officer didn't panic. "I am not getting on the ground in my own front yard, deputy. I have identification in my back pocket. I am a retired master sergeant. Put the gun away, and let's talk like men." This was the wrong thing to say to Kyle Vance. To Vance, reason sounded like defiance. The mention of rank sounded like a challenge to his own authority. He was within 10 feet of Marcus now. "Last warning," Vance bellowed. "I am complying by not moving," Marcus said calmly. "I am not a threat. Look at the fence. Look at the tools." Vance didn't look. He holstered his weapon in a split-second decision to go hands-on, convinced he needed to physically dominate this suspect. He rushed Marcus, grabbing the older man by the shoulder and the wrist. "You're under arrest," Vance shouted. "For what?" Marcus demanded, bracing his feet. He didn't fight back, didn't strike the officer, but he didn't make himself light either. He was 220 pounds of solid muscle. "Unbind me. You are making a mistake. Resisting. You're resisting." Vance chanted the magic words that bad cops use to justify their escalation. He hooked his leg behind Marcus's knee and threw his weight forward. Marcus went down. He could have stopped it. He knew hand-to-hand combat techniques that could have immobilized the deputy in 3 seconds flat. But he knew that fighting back against a police officer, even a wrong one, was a death sentence for a black man in America. So he took the fall. He hit the grass hard. A sharp, blinding pain shot through his right shoulder, the same shoulder that had taken shrapnel in the Gulf War, the shoulder that had required 3 surgeries to reconstruct. Marcus grunted, his teeth clenched tight. "Watch the shoulder." Marcus gasped, his face pressed into the smell of his own freshly cut grass. "I have a service injury. Watch the shoulder." Vance didn't listen. He was in control mode. He jammed his knee into the small of Marcus's back, putting his full weight on the veteran's spine. He grabbed Marcus's right arm, the bad one, and wrenched it behind his back with unnecessary torque. "Stop fighting!" Vance yelled for the benefit of the imaginary audience, even though Marcus was lying perfectly still. "I am not fighting." Marcus gritted out the pain, causing sweat to bead instantly on his forehead. "You are injuring a disabled veteran. I am telling you my ID is in my back right pocket." Vance snapped the handcuffs on. He ratcheted them tight, tighter than regulation, the metal biting into Marcus's wrists. He didn't check for spacing. He was breathing heavy, feeling the rush of the capture. By now, the commotion had drawn the neighborhood out. Not just Bradley Cummings, who was peeking from his door, but the real neighbors. Mrs. Gable, a 70-year-old retired school teacher from next door, stepped onto her porch. Tom Henderson, a calm, middle-aged accountant from 2 doors down, walked right out onto the sidewalk. "Hey!" Tom shouted, his voice steady but angry. "What the hell are you doing? That's Marcus." Vance looked up wild-eyed. Back up, police business. Back up or you're next. That is the homeowner, Mrs. Gable yelled, clutching her cardigan. He's lived here for 20 years. You get off him right now. Vance ignored them. In his mind, the crowd was hostile. The suspect was secured, and he was the hero who had neutralized the threat. He hauled Marcus to his feet. Marcus stumbled his shoulder, screaming in agony, but he regained his footing. He looked Vance dead in the eye. There was no fear in Marcus's gaze, only a cold, terrifying disappointment. You have just destroyed your life, son, Marcus said quietly. I tried to tell you. Shut up. Vance spat. He pushed Marcus toward the patrol car. You can tell it to the judge. Vance leaned Marcus against the hood of the cruiser, the metal hot from the engine. He began the pat-down search, aggressive and rough. He patted down the cargo pants, feeling for weapons. He found a tape measure. He found a pencil. And then he reached into the back right pocket. Vance pulled out a worn leather bifold wallet. He flipped it open. There behind the clear plastic window was a Florida driver's license. The photo was clearly Marcus Thorne. The address listed was the exact house they were standing in front of 412 Sycamore Drive. Vance stared at it. His brain stuttered. The adrenaline began to curdle into something cold and sick in his stomach. Homeowner. He flipped a flap. A Department of Defense retired military ID card. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army. Vance looked at the ID. Then he looked at the house. Then he looked at the fence where the tools were neatly laid out. The narrative he had built the burglar. The crowbar. The danger crumbled instantly. He was holding proof that he had just assaulted and handcuffed an innocent man on his own property. But here is where character reveals itself. A good man would have realized the mistake, uncuffed the suspect immediately, and started apologizing profusely. A good officer would have owned the error. Kyle Vance was not that man. His ego was too fragile to accept that he had been so completely wrong. Panic set in, but it was a selfish panic. If I let him go now, I admit I messed up. If I charge him, I justify the use of force. He shoved the wallet into his own pocket. Doesn't matter, Vance muttered more to himself than Marcus. You resisted. You failed to comply with a lawful order. That's an arrestable offense. You looked at the ID. Marcus said, his voice hard. You see that this is my house. If you don't take these cuffs off right now, there is no coming back from this. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting an officer, Vance announced, doubling down on his stupidity. Get in the car. This is insane, Tom Henderson shouted from the sidewalk. He had his phone out now, filming. We all know him. He's fixing his fence. Look at the ID. I said back up. Vance screamed at the neighbor, his hand hovering near his taser. He was losing control of the scene. The neighbors were closing in, not with violence, but with the undeniable pressure of witnesses who knew the truth. I called the supervisor, Marcus said calmly. I told my wife to call the station as soon as you pulled up. He'll be here in 2 minutes. Vance froze. He hadn't realized Marcus's wife was inside watching. The sound of another siren cut through the air, but this one was different. It shut off a block away. A heavy black SUV rolled up to the scene, parking calmly behind Vance's cruiser. The door opened and Sergeant Miller stepped out. Miller was 55 years old, a veteran of the force with graying hair and a demeanor that commanded respect without raising a voice. He knew the community. He knew his deputies. And he knew trouble when he saw it. He walked onto the lawn, his eyes scanning everything. He saw the weapon, a crowbar lying next to a box of nails. He saw the burglar, a man he recognized from the Veterans Day parade, handcuffed against a hood. And he saw Vance looking sweaty and defensive. Vance, Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. What exactly do we have here? Suspect was reported for burglary in progress, Sarge, Vance said fast, the words tumbling out. I arrived. He had a weapon. Refused to drop it. Refused to comply. Had to go hands-on. He resisted. Miller looked at Marcus. Sir, are you Marcus Thorne? I am Sergeant, Marcus replied. My ID is in the deputy's pocket, along with my military identification. Miller turned his gaze to Vance. It was a look that could peel paint off a wall. Give me the wallet. Vance hesitated, then handed it over. Miller looked at the license. He looked at the house. He looked at the neighbors standing on the sidewalk, shaking their heads. He lives here, Vance, Miller said, his voice rising. He lives here. He's fixing his fence. He resisted, Sarge. He wouldn't get on the ground. Why should he get on the ground in his own front yard for fixing a fence? Miller barked. Did you verify residence? Did you talk to him? Or did you just roll up like Rambo? The call said burglary. Use your eyes, Miller shouted. He walked over to Marcus. Sir, I'm going to remove these cuffs right now. I apologize. I apologize profusely. Miller unlocked the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists where deep red welts had formed. He rotated his shoulder and winced. You hurt him, Miller asked, seeing the wince. He tackled me, Marcus said. I told him about my shoulder. He cranked it anyway. Miller turned back to Vance. The sergeant's face was red with fury. Vance, you are relieved of duty. Give me your badge and your gun. Now. Sarge, come on, he wasn't complying. Badge, gun, now, Miller roared. You arrested a homeowner for gardening. You ignored standard procedure. You ignored the neighbors. You ignored common sense. Get in the back of my SUV. Vance handed over his gear, his hands shaking. For the first time, the reality of what he had done crashed down on him. He wasn't the hero. He was the villain. The fallout was swift, but the damage was done. The video Tom Henderson took went viral within hours. The image of a decorated black veteran being handcuffed on his own lawn while a young deputy screamed at him was played on every news station from New York to Los Angeles. The Pinewood County Sheriff's Department tried to get ahead of it, but the internal affairs investigation was damning. The review of Vance's dashcam footage showed he arrived with bias, escalated without cause, and used excessive force on a compliant citizen. He had ignored the ID. He had lied about the resistance. Bradley Cummings, the neighbor who made the call, faced his own reckoning. When the 911 tape was released revealing his exaggerated claims of a violent man with a weapon, the community turned on him. He was pariah. He had endangered a man's life because of his own prejudice. Within 2 months, for sale signs went up at the Cummings residence. He moved away in shame. Marcus Thorne sued. He didn't want to. He was a private man. But he knew that if he didn't hold them accountable, it would happen to someone else. Someone who might not have his rank, his discipline, or his neighbors. The lawsuit exposed a pattern of ignored complaints against Deputy Vance. It exposed a failure of supervision. The jury didn't take long. They awarded Marcus Thorne $1.9 million in damages for false arrest, excessive force, and civil rights violations. Kyle Vance was fired. The union refused to back him after seeing the video. He was decertified as a law enforcement officer, ensuring he would never carry a badge and a gun again. At 29, he had to start over, known forever as the cop who arrested a veteran for fixing a fence. But money doesn't fix a shoulder that aches when it rains. And a settlement doesn't erase the memory of being treated like a criminal in front of the home you worked 20 years to pay for. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of society are we building where a man can't repair his own home without risking his life? How many more times do we have to see this script play out before the training changes, before the biases are rooted out? Marcus Thorne still lives in that house. The fence is fixed. He finished it a week after his shoulder healed. He still raises his flag every morning. He still helps the widows with the snow. But when a police cruiser drives down Sycamore Drive now, he doesn't wave. He watches. He waits. Because he knows that sometimes the danger isn't the criminal breaking in. Sometimes it's the knock at the door from the ones who are supposed to protect you. Do you think neighbors who make false racially biased 911 calls should face criminal charges, or should officers be personally liable for settlements like this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in justice for men like Marcus, share this story. Let's make sure everyone knows that true service is about character, not just wearing a uniform.